It started with a stupid bet. Every year, a bunch of us from college would go on a disconnect trip. No phones, no internet, just nature and each other. That year, we ended up renting a rustic old cabin in the Catskills, one that looked like it hadn't seen life since the 1970s. It was remote, no cell signal, no neighbors for miles, and the kind of silence that made your ears ring. The place was cheap, almost suspiciously cheap, but we were broke and reckless, so we took it. On the first night, while unpacking beers and sleeping bags, Kyle, the loudmouth of the group, found a framed note on the wall near the front door. It was yellowed, water-stained, and written in shaky cursive. No one leaves this cabin after midnight. Ever. Of course, we laughed. It looked like one of those fake horror props you buy online. Local folklore, one of us joked, or maybe the previous tenant was a vampire. We dismissed it, but I remember the way it made my skin itch. There was something about the handwriting. Too desperate to be decoration. That night, we partied. Music, fire pit, lots of drinks. At some point, Kyle dared two others, Matt and Jordan, to sneak out after midnight just to prove the sign was a joke. They agreed, laughing, and left through the back door at 12:07 a.m. They didn't come back. At first, we thought they were hiding, to mess with us, but by 1 a.m., the laughter died down. By 2 a.m., we were all silent, eyes on the front door, waiting for someone to knock or yell, "Gotcha!" Nothing. At 3:30 a.m., I stepped out on the porch. There was no wind, no sound. Just a dense, unnatural fog had rolled in like a wall, so thick I couldn't see past the first tree. I called for them. My voice disappeared into the fog like it was being swallowed. When I turned back to go inside, the door was locked from the inside and everyone else was still sleeping. I pounded on it for almost 5 minutes before someone let me in. The next morning, we searched the forest for hours. No footprints, no jackets, no sign they'd ever left. Kyle's bag was still by the fireplace. Jordan's shoes were by the door. Matt's hoodie was on the armchair, but they were gone. And that's when we realized no one was joking. The sign wasn't a game. It was a warning, a rule, one that we'd broken. Do you think the note was left by someone who survived a past incident, or something else entirely? Tell us what you would have done. Leave your thoughts in the comments. We didn't pack up and leave. I wish I could say we were smart enough to do that, but panic doesn't work like that. Instead, we rationalized everything. Maybe they wandered too far and got lost. Maybe they went into town for food or to prank us. Maybe they were trying to mess with our heads. But by the second day, the mood shifted. The air inside the cabin felt heavier. The walls creaked more than before. We started hearing noises we hadn't noticed the first night. Soft thumps in the ceiling, creaks on the porch floorboards when no one was there. One of us, Megan, said she heard whispering outside her window around 4 a.m. We told her it was probably the wind, but the fear was spreading, slow and silent, like the fog that hadn't lifted since that first night. It just sat outside, thick and unmoving, like it was waiting. Around dusk, we found something strange. Behind the cabin, buried beneath a collapsed shed, we discovered an old wooden trapdoor. It wasn't part of the cabin's original blueprint, at least not the one the owner had sent us. We pried it open with a rusted crowbar. The hinges groaned, like they hadn't been touched in decades. What we found underneath was a narrow staircase made of stone, leading down into pure darkness. Kyle, who had been silent since Matt and Jordan vanished, suddenly insisted we go down. "They might be in there," he said. His voice was shaking, not from fear, but something worse. Hope mixed with denial. He grabbed a flashlight and descended. Before we could stop him, only one other person, Becca, followed him. The rest of us waited by the opening, holding our breath. They were gone for 20 minutes. When they came back up, they looked pale, sweaty. Becca's hands were shaking, and Kyle refused to speak. He just sat by the fire the rest of the night, staring into the flames. Becca told us the basement was empty, just stone walls, old furniture, and something that looked like a crude altar made of bones and melted candles. But she also said she heard breathing, not theirs, deep and rhythmic, like something huge was asleep nearby. And on the far wall, scratched into the stone, were the words, "Stay inside." That night, we locked every door and window. No one dared to joke anymore. Kyle started drawing symbols on the floor with ash from the fireplace. None of us knew what they meant. He said he didn't either. Said he just saw them when he closed his eyes. Around 2:15 a.m. the power went out. No storm, no reason, just sudden, complete darkness. I lit a candle. The flame was tiny, but it cast shadows, long, twitching shadows, and one of them didn't belong to anyone in the room. It moved across the wall slowly, like it was watching us. Megan screamed. The shadow stopped, then vanished. We didn't sleep, not really. We just waited for morning, hoping the light would fix everything. But when dawn came, the fog was still there, thicker than before, and the front door wouldn't open. What do you think is under that trap door? A passage to another place? Or something older and watching? Share your theories below. I want to hear what you think it really is. We spent the entire third day trying to open the front door, the back door, even the windows. Nothing would budge. It wasn't like they were jammed or stuck. It was as if the wood itself had fused together, like the house no longer wanted us to leave. We even tried breaking one of the windows with a chair, but the glass didn't crack, not even a scratch. Becca took a kitchen knife to the back door frame, sawing and chipping at the hinges, but the blade snapped. It was like the cabin had become part of something else, something alive. That was the day Megan started talking to herself. At first, we thought she was just muttering out of stress, repeating mantras like, "We'll be okay," or just breathe. But later that evening, I heard her whispering a name, over and over, a name none of us recognized, Elior. I asked her who that was. She just stared at me, wide-eyed, and said, "He watches from the fog." That night we slept in shifts, or tried to. The whispering outside returned, louder now, circling the cabin like it was searching. At 3:17 a.m. we all heard it. A low knock on the door, just once, then silence. We held our breath frozen, no one moved. Then came the sound of something dragging across the porch, slow, deliberate, a scraping like claws or nails. Kyle started praying under his breath, but not in English. It sounded like Latin or something older. When we asked him about it later, he said he didn't remember praying at all. That was when we realized Kyle hadn't eaten or slept since coming up from the basement. He sat by the fire constantly, drawing more symbols in the ash, murmuring words we couldn't understand. That morning, the trapdoor was open again. Jukuto had closed and locked it the night before. This time the staircase was lit, not by any light we had turned on, but by a dim, pulsating glow coming from deep below. Against our better judgment, we all agreed to go down together. The logic was simple. We had nowhere else to go. Maybe whatever was happening started in that basement. Maybe we could end it there. The air grew colder with every step. The walls narrowed. The stone turned wet, almost like skin. When we reached the bottom, we found a second door, not made of wood or metal, but something leathery, breathing slightly. In the center of the door, there was a handprint burned into the surface. Kyle touched it before we could stop him. The door opened silently. Inside was a small room with stone walls and a single object in the center, a mirror. Not dusty, not cracked, but pristine, reflecting us perfectly. But there was something wrong. In the reflection, there were more of us. Two people who weren't there. One looked like Matt, the other, Jordan. They stood behind us in the reflection. In faces blank, eyes pitch black. I turned around. The room was empty, but in the mirror they were smiling. What do you think that mirror is showing? A warning, a trap, or a doorway? Let me know in the comments. And what would you have? done in that moment. We backed away from the mirror, but it was like our reflections were lagging behind, just slightly out of sync, like we were being watched through a delay. And then something even worse happened. Kyle leaned in, staring hard at the reflection of Jordan and Matt. "They're not gone," he whispered. "They're here. They're just on the other side." Before we could stop him, he reached toward the mirror. His hand didn't hit glass. It passed through, like the surface was water. The moment his fingers breached the mirror, the whole room shook violently. A sound like 1,000 whispers erupted from the walls, rising into a screech that forced us all to our knees. The mirror went dark. When we looked again, our reflections were gone. The room was silent. The only thing left in the mirror's frame was Kyle's handprint, burned into the glass. We ran. We scrambled back up the stairs, out of the basement, and into the cabin. But when we emerged, something had changed. The fog outside was no longer grey. It was red, glowing faintly like the embers of a dying fire. And the air inside the cabin was warm, humid, like a fever had settled into the wood. Megan was standing in the living room when we entered, but she wasn't looking at us. She was staring into the fireplace, mumbling again. "Elior sees. Elior waits." Her voice was deeper than before, like someone else was speaking through her. When we tried to approach, she turned and screamed, a sound so sharp and guttural it made the windows vibrate. Then she collapsed. We carried her to the couch and tried to wake her, but she wouldn't respond. Her eyes were wide open, locked. Onto the ceiling, lips moving but making no sound. Kyle sat beside her, whispering something over and over. We couldn't hear what it was at first, but then Becca got close and froze. "He's saying the same thing," she whispered. "Elior sees. Elior waits." That night, the scratching returned. But this time, it came from inside the walls. It circled the cabin, moved from the fireplace to the kitchen to the bathroom, like something was testing the structure, searching for cracks. Around 1:44 a.m., the mirror reappeared, this time hanging on the wall above the mantel, where a dusty painting used to be. None of us had moved it. We hadn't even brought it upstairs, but there it was, spotless and scented, as if it had always belonged there. And in the mirror, we saw the cabin, not as it was now, but how it looked decades ago. Cleaner, warmer, full of people. We saw a family sitting around the fire, parents, children, a dog sleeping by their feet, all of them smiling. But then something entered the room. A tall, thin figure cloaked in black with no face. The moment it appeared, the family froze, still smiling but unmoving, like mannequins, and the figure turned toward us, not in the mirror, but in the room. We spun around. No one was there, but Megan screamed again and pointed toward the mirror. The figure had moved. Closer. Kyle stood and whispered, "He's almost here." Becca shouted, "Who? Who's here?" Kyle looked at her with empty eyes and answered, "Elior." That was when we heard the front door creak. Not open, just creak, as if someone had touched it, slowly, gently. The door that had been sealed for days. And then Megan sat up. Her voice was clear now, calm. "We broke the rule, now he's coming to finish it. What do you think Elior really is? A spirit, a demon, or something older than both? Share your theories below. And what would you have done after seeing that mirror again?" None of us spoke for what felt like hours. We just sat there, frozen, watching the mirror and waiting for that figure, Elior, if that was really his name, to appear again. But it didn't. Not in the reflection, not in the room. The only thing we could hear was the faint crackling of the fire, which now burned with a bluish glow instead of orange, casting long, unnatural shadows across the wooden walls. Megan, now sitting upright on the couch, was eerily calm. Her face had lost all color, and her lips moved in rhythm with the crackling flames, like she was reciting something only the fire could hear. Becca sat across from her, whispering our options like a mantra. We wait for morning. We try the back door. Maybe the mirror is a portal. But none of us could move. We were held in place by something heavy in the air, like pressure, like gravity itself had changed. Kyle suddenly stood and walked to the hallway where the bedrooms were. Without saying a word, he opened the door at the end, the one we hadn't used, the one that had been stuck shut since the day we arrived. It opened with no resistance this time. Inside was a child's room, untouched by dust or time. Toys were scattered on the floor. The bed was neatly made, and on the wall in crayon was written the word Elior over and over and over again, covering every inch of plaster like a child had become obsessed. In the center of the bed sat an old music box. Kyle picked it up and turned the crank. A soft lullaby began to play. At first, it was comforting. But as the tune went on, it began to distort, notes falling out of place, dragging into minor chords. Then, in the hallway behind him, we saw a shape, small, childlike, crouched against the wall. Becca screamed. Kyle dropped the music box. The sound stopped instantly, and the hallway was empty. But when we turned back to the room, the writing on the wall had changed. No longer just Elior. It now read, "He lives in the time between seconds." We tried to ask Megan what it meant, but she only smiled and said, "You'll see." That night, everything fell apart. At exactly midnight, the lights flickered. The cabin groaned as if something had latched onto its roof. The whispering came. Back louder than ever, not from outside, but from inside the walls, the floor, the ceiling. Kyle began to chant again, those same unintelligible words, faster this time, rocking back and forth. Becca tried to stop him, grabbing his shoulders. Shouting at him, he looked up at her and whispered, "I saw them, Jordan and Matt. They're still here, just out of sync." Suddenly, the room temperature dropped to near freezing. Every window frosted over, and a deep growl echoed from the basement. The trapdoor burst open, but no one approached it. Instead, the mirror cracked just once, diagonally, as if something inside had pressed against the glass from within. We all backed away. Megan stood now, her eyes glowing faintly, her mouth hanging open in a silent scream. She pointed toward the front door, and it opened, just slightly. Just enough to reveal the red fog outside, and within it, a figure, tall, faceless, wearing a coat of shadows. It didn't move, it didn't speak, it just waited. "He won't come in," Megan said, "not unless we invite him." But then she looked straight at me and whispered, "And you already did. Do you think the narrator unknowingly invited Elior in? Or is something manipulating their actions? Let me know your theory in the comments. What's really happening inside this cabin?" I didn't remember inviting anything, not with words, not out loud. But the way Megan looked at me, calm, certain, almost pitying, told me that maybe it didn't take words. Maybe just attention was enough, or fear, or curiosity, maybe. When I opened the trap door the first time, or when I stared too long into the mirror, maybe that was the invitation. The others looked at me like I had suddenly become dangerous. Becca stepped back, arms crossed, eyes wide with suspicion. Kyle was still chanting in the corner, his voice trembling now, like even he was afraid of what he was summoning, or holding back. I tried to speak, to deny it, but something in my throat tightened like a fist had clenched around my voice. Megan walked over to the fireplace and reached behind the mirror. With no effort, she pulled it off the wall. Behind it was a hollow cavity in the wood, and inside it, a journal, bound in worn leather, stained with time. She handed it to me. I hesitated, then opened it. The handwriting was chaotic, panicked, but familiar. It matched the note on the wall from the first night. No one leaves after midnight. The journal belonged to a man named Henry Kellard. His entries started normal, building the cabin in the late 60s, retreating from city life with his wife and young son. But things changed quickly. Strange dreams, voices in the woods. His son, Jamie, began speaking to someone invisible. someone he called Elior. At first, they thought it was an imaginary friend, but then Jamie stopped sleeping. He drew symbols on the walls, spoke in languages he'd never learned, screamed every night at 3:07 a.m. Then one day he disappeared. No sign of a struggle, no broken windows, no open doors, just vanished. Henry wrote about the days after, how the cabin began to close itself off, how the fog never left, how he heard Jamie's voice coming from under the floorboards. The final entry was short, just 6 words, scratched in with trembling desperation. He lives between the seconds now. I dropped the journal. The silence in the room was suffocating. Becca whispered, "That means this has happened before." Megan nodded. It never stopped happening. The cabin just waits. That night, the clock stopped at 11:59 p.m. No matter how many times we wound it, replaced the batteries, or tried to reset it, the hands wouldn't move. The cabin didn't want midnight to come, or maybe it wanted us to forget that it already had. Outside, the fog pressed harder against the windows, glowing slightly with that red hue. Shadows danced inside it, not walking, twitching, stuttering. Like old film played too fast and too slow at the same time. Kyle stood suddenly and said, "He's coming through the cracks." He pointed to the corners of the room, where the walls met the ceiling. Black veins were spreading along the wood, pulsing with each heartbeat, like something was bleeding in reverse. Megan's eyes rolled back. She whispered, "We broke the seal." The fireplace flared violently, casting the room in a deep orange. From the trapdoor, a sound rose, not footsteps, not growling, but music. That lullaby again, warped, slowing down. And with it came the voice, deep, cold, whispering all our names one by one. When it spoke mine, I felt it in my spine. I turned to Becca. She was crying quietly. "You were the first one to speak his name," she said. "Out loud, the first night. You repeated it." I didn't remember doing that, but I believed her, because I could feel something inside. Me opening, a door I never knew existed, a space in my thoughts that didn't belong to me, and from it, a voice whispered back, "Let me finish what was promised." Do you think the cabin traps souls, memories, or something worse? And what was promised? A deal, a sacrifice, or revenge? Share your theory in the comments. I want to hear how you would try to escape. We couldn't stay in that room, not with the trapdoor open and that lullaby echoing from below like a heartbeat slowed to a crawl. Kyle had collapsed into a heap by the fireplace, arms wrapped around his knees, rocking like a child. Megan stood, perfectly still in the corner, staring at the far wall where shadows now flickered on their own, despite the fire dying down. Becca grabbed my arm and whispered, "We have to seal the trapdoor again. We have to end whatever we started." Her voice cracked, but her eyes were sharp. I nodded. I didn't know if sealing it would work, or if we were already too far gone, but it felt like the only thing we could control. We moved together, slowly, as if trying not to wake something sleeping under the floor. Every creak of the wood felt like a scream. When we reached the trapdoor, we noticed something had changed. It was no longer wood, not entirely. It felt soft, almost like skin. When I touched it, it pulsed. I recoiled, and Becca gasped. "It's alive," she whispered. "It's part of him now." We looked for something to weigh it down, to keep it shut. A heavy dresser, nails, even the fireplace tools, anything. But when we turned back, the door was closed on its own. No sound, no movement, just sealed, as if it had never opened. Kyle stood behind us now. His face was blank, lips slightly parted. "He's inside," he said, not looking at us. "He doesn't need the door anymore." That night, we didn't try to sleep. We sat in a circle in the living room, surrounded by candles we'd found in a drawer. Megan had drawn symbols on the floor again, this time in red ink, or what looked like ink. I didn't ask where she got it. The journal lay open on the floor beside her, and she traced the entries with her finger like they were instructions. The mirror reflected none of this. In the mirror, the room was empty, silent, clean, but as we watched, shapes began to appear in its corners. Faint at first, like smudges, then slowly taking form. Eyes, dozens of them, watching from behind the glass. Kyle whispered a word we hadn't heard before, not Elior, but something harsher, older. The room shook. Becca stood and grabbed the mirror, lifting it off the wall and smashing it to the ground. It didn't. Shatter! It bounced once, then lay still. We stared at it, expecting it to crack, to bleed, to react, but it just lay there. Then Megan said, "It's not a mirror, it's a window." She picked it up and turned it toward the trap door. The glass began to glow, a soft blue light that pulsed in sync with the heartbeat we could now hear in the walls. Becca backed away, crying. "We're not going to make it out," she whispered. "It wants one of us, maybe more." That was when the clock, which hadn't moved since it froze at 11:59 p.m., ticked forward. One click, midnight. The candles went out. The temperature dropped so fast it hurt to breathe. And from the hallway we heard footsteps, slow, deliberate, approaching with weight that bent the floorboards. Kyle stood and walked toward the sound. We screamed for him, begged him to stop. But he turned to us with a smile and said, "He's ready now." And then he vanished. Just disappeared. No scream, no flash, no sound. 1 second he was there. The next, only his footprints remained, burned into the wood. Megan collapsed. Becca pulled me toward the door, screaming, sobbing, "We have to get out, we have to try." She kicked at the front door with everything she had, and this time it opened, just a crack, just enough for cold red fog to pour in like smoke from a furnace. I looked into it and saw shapes moving, dozens of them, maybe more, but one was standing still, watching, waiting. Megan whispered from the floor, "You invited him, but he doesn't want just you anymore." Then she looked up at us and said, "He wants whoever walks out first." Would you risk stepping outside to escape, knowing something is waiting, or stay inside with what's already entered? Tell me what you would do in the comments. The door hung open just enough to tempt, not enough to comfort. The red fog slithered across the floor like something alive, curling around the furniture, licking at our ankles. It wasn't warm or cold. It was empty, like the absence of all. Feeling. Becca stared at it, trembling, her hand hovering over the knob, as if every cell in her body screamed at her to run, while something deeper whispered, "Stay." Megan was still on the floor, eyes glazed, mouth murmuring in that dead language we'd never heard, but somehow understood. I grabbed Becca's wrist. "If you walk out, it won't be you that leaves," I said. She looked at me and nodded, but I saw it in her eyes. Doubt, fatigue, and a tiny glint of surrender. We closed the door, locked it, barricaded it with the broken mirror, a chair, and our weight. The fog didn't push harder. It didn't need to. It had time. The clock hadn't moved since midnight struck. Not a second passed on its face, as if time itself had been replaced by something older, something that didn't tick. In that timeless silence, we heard it again, the lullaby, this time from inside the cabin, coming from the hallway. Becca grabbed a fire poker. I took a flashlight. We moved as a unit, slow and deliberate, down the hall toward the source. The door to the child's room, the one Kyle had opened, was wide now. Inside, the music box sat perfectly still, but the song continued, playing from nowhere. On the walls, the crayon drawings had changed. No longer just the name Elior, but images. Dozens of stick figures with hollow circles for eyes, all standing in a line, facing a tall shadow with no face. Above them, written in jagged black strokes, was a phrase, "Only the chosen leave." Megan appeared behind us without a sound. "He's watching through the walls," she said calmly. "He wants a story. One more story before the door closes forever." I asked her what that meant. She just smiled and turned back toward the living room. We followed. There, in front of the fireplace, stood Kyle, alive, or something wearing his shape. His clothes were the same, but too clean. His skin was pale, almost translucent, and his eyes, pitch black, no whites, no color, like two holes drilled into his skull. He spoke, but his mouth didn't move. One leaves if one tells the truth. Becca gripped the fire poker tighter. What truth? I asked. Kyle's head tilted. The first sin, the original invitation. And suddenly I remembered. The first night, before the bet, before the trapdoor, before anything, I had found something else in the cabin. A sealed envelope. I hadn't told anyone. I'd opened it and read the note inside. To the one who reads this, if you speak his name aloud, he will listen. I had laughed. I had read it out loud as a joke. Elior! The name had tasted strange in my mouth. I hadn't thought about it since, but now, standing there, I felt it in my spine. The moment everything shifted, the moment the door opened. Becca stared at me in horror. It was you, she said. You brought him. Kyle nodded, or the thing wearing. Kyle's face did. He offers you one chance. Tell the story. Give him your truth. I didn't know what it meant. Was this whole thing a punishment, a test, or entertainment for something that fed on fear, on memory, on guilt? Megan lit the candles again. The fire rose higher than before, licking the stone. I sat in front of it. I told everything. About the letter, about the name, about the moment I thought it was all a joke. The room listened. Even the walls felt like they were breathing with me. And when I finished, the cabin sighed. The fog outside withdrew. The shadows receded. The mirror cracked, this time for real, and light poured through it, a golden, blinding light. Kyle vanished. Not violently, just faded into it. Megan collapsed. Becca held me, sobbing. And for the first time in what felt like days, the clock ticked again. 12. Midnight once more. But something felt wrong, like a loop had closed instead of a door. Do you think telling the truth freed them? Or just completed a ritual they didn't understand? Tell me your theory. In the comments, would you have confessed or stayed silent? The light didn't last. It flooded the cabin for maybe 30 seconds, golden, warm, pure. And for a brief, impossible moment, I believed it was over. That whatever force had trapped us, tormented us, was satisfied. That truth was enough. But as quickly as it came, the light died. Not faded, died. Like it had been swallowed. The room fell back into shadow, only now it was colder than ever. Becca stared at the mirror, which now lay in pieces across the floor, shards scattered, like frozen slivers of night. In one of them I still saw movement, a reflection of something that wasn't in the room, a tall, dark figure walking deeper into the house. We both turned. Nothing. Megan hadn't moved. Her eyes were closed now, breathing slow and steady, like she was in a deep sleep. I touched her shoulder. She opened her eyes and whispered, "The story has only begun." I backed away. "What do you mean, it's over? I told him everything. I told the truth." But she shook her head, and there was something different in her voice now. Clarity, awareness. "You told your truth. But the cabin has its own." We looked around and noticed something chilling. The cabin was different, not in obvious ways, but subtly, hauntingly. The floorboards were cleaner. The wallpaper, which had been peeling, was new. The furniture was rearranged. Outside, the fog was gone, replaced by gentle snowfall, and then we heard it, tires crunching on gravel. A car. Someone was arriving. Becca ran to the window and gasped. "It's them," she said. "What are you talking about?" I asked, running to her side. She pointed. "It's us." A car pulled up into the driveway, the same old Jeep we had rented, and out stepped 4 people. Me, Becca, Kyle, Megan. Laughing, carrying bags, Opening the front door, I staggered back from the window. No, that's impossible. Megan stood up slowly. The cabin doesn't trap people. It records them, stories layered on top of stories. Each time someone invites him, the house remembers. It builds the next version. And now, it's your turn to be the memory. I shook my head, but I felt it in my bones. The wrongness, the loop, the click of something ancient locking into place. Becca was frozen, whispering, "We didn't escape. We just became part of it." We heard the sound of the front door, opening from the past or the future or both, the sound of them arriving, of us arriving. The Megan standing beside me smiled faintly and said, "It's okay. It's not pain he wants, it's stories. He feeds on the telling, the remembering." I turned and ran into the hallway, the bedroom, the child's room. All the drawings were gone. The journal wasn't where we'd left it. The trapdoor was sealed, smooth, like it had never been there. The cabin wasn't haunted by ghosts. It was haunted by echoes, by scripts, by reenactments. I fell to my knees trying to scream, but the sound wouldn't come. Outside, I saw them moving around, settling in unaware, and then I saw one of them, the other me, stop and stare at the wall. At the same note I'd read the first time, "No one leaves this cabin after midnight, ever." He read it aloud and smiled, and I realized it had already begun again. The loop, the trap, the stage reset for a new performance. Megan, or whoever she was now, placed a hand on my shoulder and whispered, "This time, you're the watcher. Wait for the cracks. Wait for the one who speaks his name. And when they do, the cabin will breathe again." Do you think the cabin is a living entity or a prison built from memories? Are the characters dead, trapped, or part of something bigger? Share your theory. Would you fall into the same trap if you saw that note? I don't know how long I've been here. There are no clocks anymore, not really. The one above the fireplace always reads 11:59. I've stopped trying to change it. I've stopped fighting the silence. The cabin no longer speaks to me with voices or footsteps. Now it speaks in stillness, in the weight of memory. Becca doesn't talk anymore. She walks from room to room, humming the lullaby we once feared, like it's always been hers. Megan sits by the fire, drawing symbols in ash that never smudge, never fade. I watch. That's all I do now. Watch. From behind the glass. I don't feel hunger. I don't feel cold. I'm not sure if I even breathe, but I see. Every time they arrive, every time someone reads the note and chuckles, every time the trapdoor is discovered and the mirror reflects more than it should, every time someone says his name, Elior, that sound unlocks everything, like a spell cast in ignorance or a story begging to be heard. And so I watch the cycles begin. The faces change, but the actions never do. A new group arrives. Friends, laughter, disbelief, then doubt, then fear, then silence. I saw them again this morning, a couple, just two this time, maybe on a retreat. They laughed at the lack of Wi-Fi, commented on the vintage feel of the cabin. She found the note first. He read it aloud. She rolled her eyes, and I felt it. The shift. The breath, the cabin waking up again. I wanted to warn them, to scream. But I'm not in the cabin anymore. I am the cabin, or part of it. My reflection appears in the window sometimes, not quite right. My voice echoes in the floorboards when no one is speaking. I exist between the seconds, like the note said. I thought confession would save us, that telling the truth would break the cycle, but it only completed the story. The cabin doesn't punish liars. It collects stories, devours them, stores the souls behind every memory. And when it's full enough, when the past ripples just right, it lets one voice whisper out again, luring in someone new. Maybe even you. Maybe you're listening now, alone in the dark. Maybe you're planning a trip. Maybe you've already booked a remote cabin, cheap, quiet, isolated. Maybe you'll find a note by the front door, handwritten, a little worn. Maybe you'll read it out loud, not really thinking. No one leaves this cabin after midnight ever, and when you do, when that name slips from your lips for the first time, I'll be watching, from behind the mirror, from inside the walls, waiting. Because the story only works if it's heard, and the cabin only lives if it's remembered. What do you think the cabin truly is? A curse, a consciousness, or something worse? Would you have ignored the warning? Or did the warning itself make you curious enough to stay? Let me know in the comments. Your answer might just become the next story.